ITEXPO Miami 2009.
Okay, so with that, we've got our next keynoter. I'm very excited to hear what he has to say. It's Danny Windham, who's the CEO of Digium. Danny has also been the president and COO of Adtran, which is a company that's been in the networking and communication space for a number of years. So he's got a wealth of experience, and I'm looking forward to having him share it with us this morning. Thanks.
Thank you, Rich. And thank you, John. I do think our companies have quite a bit in common. As I was listening to your speech, I was struck by comparing and contrasting the two organizations. And I sort of made a mental list of just how different our organizations are. Philosophically, Digium is committed to the fact that open source software is the future. We don't have a cafeteria. We believe that value-added channels are the most appropriate way to get to serve this customer base today. We have 1.5 people in our legal department. I don't have any animation in my slides, and we're not going to spend $7 billion on anything because we don't have $7 billion. And then I got to thinking, maybe that's just dwelling too much on how the companies are different. Maybe I should dwell on how the companies are alike. And so I started making a mental list of how the companies are alike. For example, we both have 3 syllables in the names of our company. Microsoft, Digium. I actually couldn't come up with anything else, but I promise by next show, I will work hard to try to make that list longer. My name is Danny Windham. I am with Digium. Digium is an Alabama-based company that is the creator, the sponsor, and the maintainer of Asterisk. Asterisk is the world's most popular open source IP telephony engine. We are also a for-profit company. Our business mission is best described as building any product or service that will enable businesses to take advantage or leverage Asterisk. And I have to admit that, like John, I am very much a warm weather fan. Being in Miami Beach, where it's 72 degrees, considering that Alabama is having the coldest winter we have had this decade, to me is absolutely being in the right place. And being here during ITEXPO, which is now the home for Digium Asterisk World, which includes 16 organizations that are members of the Asterisk or Digium ecosystem, to me kind of feels like I'm here at the right time. So not just the right place, but also the right time. And I also believe that technologies can be in the right place at the right time. And for me, as a confluence of a number of high-level industry trends, economic events, I believe that voice over IP is the right technology at the right time. But specifically, voice over IP as it is enabled through open source software. So today, I'd like to talk a little bit about the trends that are driving this industry, some of the economic events, and how end users are taking advantage of Asterisk today. I want to talk about some new market data that's very exciting about the adoption of Asterisk in the market. You would have to have been living under a rock for the last 6 months not to have noted what has happened in the global economic crisis that's occurring at this moment. You can find pundits who are predicting what impact this global economic meltdown will have on the IT market. One that's sort of in the middle of the pack comes from Thomas Weisel Partners, who have predicted that enterprise spending will be down 30% year over year, carrier spending will be down 20% year over year, public sector spending will be down 15% year over year. And the economists that are out there have now told us, confirmed what we already knew, is that the U.S. economy has been in a recession now for over a year. The U.S. economy shed 2.6 million jobs in 2008. And 1.1 million of those came in November and December. And jobless claims in January may exceed the jobless claims in November, which was the biggest month we had seen in more than 30 years. So the impact of what's going on is not just within a particular market segment. There are no market segments and there are no geographies that are not impacted by what's going on. Well, I guess maybe that's not true. I made a mental list of markets that appear to be stronger today. It included bankruptcy attorneys, debt collectors, and motivational speakers, but that's all I could put on that list. So I believe that for the first time in 40 years, our country is at the end of a 40-year economic boom, and we are in the middle of a shakeout associated with that boom coming to an end and the shakeout associated with how the economy will be structured going forward. And for the first time in 40 years, I think consumers are saying, I might actually lose my job as a result of this economy, and maybe I should save more and spend less. And that's impacting spending. And given that consumer spending is 70% of the GDP in this country, that reduction in spending is having an effect on businesses. And businesses are saying the exact same thing. I might need my cash to live on if this economy gets any worse, so I am going to reduce my spending. And so we're not just in a recession, we are in what I would like to classify as a recession, meaning that buying behavior is being reset. Now, as things stabilize, the economy begins to improve, buyers come back into the market, I believe that buyer behavior will be very different. I think the buyers will demand a much faster ROI. They'll be looking for value in what they buy. And as a result, lower cost alternatives are going to get more attention and more airplay than they have in the past. I mentioned that spending will be down. The truth is that in this country, the demand for product really has not been impacted as much as the buyer's psychic outlook has been impacted. And so the amount of product that could be sold, I think, is pretty relatable to what it was before. It's just the amount of money people are willing to spend on it will change. And so if you look at the way we measure markets today, we measure markets in terms of revenue, the amount of money people spend on these products or services. And if really we thought about them in terms of the amount of it they were purchasing, let's take IP telephony as an example. If companies are buying IP telephony systems today that, let's just say they're buying premium branded products at an average cost of $1,000 per end user, if this resetting of buyer behavior causes them to buy products that on average cost $100 per end user, then what you will have seen is essentially a flat market from unit volume perspectives, but an order and magnitude reduction in the size of that market. It is open source based alternatives that I think can help drive those market reductions, cost reductions, and as a result, open source based solutions will gain acceptance and momentum in this economy. So if we look at some of the high-level industry trends that I think have been driving our industry, one has been the adoption of open source software. And for applications, open source applications, to become popular, the very first thing that needed to happen was the emergence of an open source operating system that's reliable, upon which those open source applications could be built. That operating system is clearly Linux. And with Linux as a reliable, stable operating system that has penetrated the enterprise, that set the stage for open source applications on top of an open source operating system to become, quote, the de facto standard for whatever application the company was pursuing. For example, Apache is clearly the de facto standard for open source web server, Firefox for open source web browser, MySQL for open source database, and Asterisk for open source telecommunications engine. A survey that was performed about 18 months ago asked IT managers and directors about their opinions related to open source. That data 18 months ago suggested that over 60% of IT managers either agreed or strongly agreed that the use of open source software would provide significant value to their business. We believe these numbers have only gone up since that time. IDC actually tracks the, quote, market for open source. This would be products and services based upon open source software, and have suggested that that market will reach almost $6 billion by the year 2010, and that there will be tens of millions of downloads of some form of open source software in the year 2009 alone. So if the stage is set from an open source software perspective, then what's happening with voice over IP adoption trends? Well, VoIP is a technology that, in relation to other technology categories, I believe will do very well during the economic upheaval, because VoIP is a technology that enables both cost savings and improved productivity. You can actually go reduce your monthly recurring communications costs by adopting VoIP. You can enable new modes of operation for your company that might make your workers more productive, might allow them to work from home, might lower your facilities cost, and as a result, VoIP will outperform traditional technologies in this economy. Frost & Sullivan has predicted that the market for IP-PBXs in 2010 will reach almost $8 billion, which is a compounded annual growth rate of 21%. But even at that growth rate, in 2010, IP-PBX penetration will still be less than half of the installed base of PBX lines. This year is the first year that IP shipments are expected to surpass the shipment of traditional TDM, and that the only bright shining star in the area of telephony is the IPT segment, as traditional telephony gives way to IP telephony. So if the table's set for open source and the table's set for VoIP, what about the adoption of open source VoIP? Well, there's a new market report just published last week from a company called Eastern Management. And to our knowledge, it's the first attempt that anyone has made to try to quantify the adoption of open source in the marketplace. And admittedly, this is a very difficult task. But Eastern Management interviewed over 50 vendors, of which digium was one, and then did surveys and interviews with end users to try to produce this data. And they have concluded that there were over 1.75 million downloads of a software open source IP-PBX in 2008, and that in North America there were roughly 500,000 downloads of those open source IP-PBX products. Through the interviews and the surveys with end users, they then concluded that of those downloads, there were roughly 86,000 PBXs put into service as a result, and that on average, there are roughly 33 endpoints connected to each one of those open source PBXs, which means that in 2008, there were almost 3 million endpoints put into service that are being supplied by an open source IP-PBX. With the total North American business telephony system market at roughly 16 million lines, open source then represents 18% of the total market. And open source, if you thought of it as a general supplier, open source then would be the #1 market share holder in the market, only followed by Nortel, Cisco, Avaya, Mitel, NEC, and then other. The report also sought to try to define market shares among the open source IP-PBX suppliers. Asterisk was found to own 88% of the open source IP-PBX market today, which means if you think of Asterisk as a supplier in the marketplace, Asterisk would be the #2 market shareholder in the market. Now, admittedly, these numbers are very difficult to track, and the exact amount of these numbers is less important to me than the magnitude of these numbers. What it says is that open source is being adopted by businesses of all sizes across all geographies at an amazing rate. There are a number of suppliers that offer open source IP-PBX products in the marketplace, many of them based upon Asterisk, and since digium gets credit for the install of those true open source Asterisk related installs, then digium is the market leader there today with 68% share. Well, if all this adoption of open source is going on, how are end users benefiting from open source products? Well, there's two ways. One, you can just buy a turnkey complete product that's based on open source. And in that case, you're most likely getting a good value because the fact that the product is based on open source creates a cost advantage and therefore maybe a price advantage in the marketplace, and maybe it comes in as a lower cost entry. And there are plenty of product classes, IP-PBXs, soft switches, media gateways, that are based on open source OSS projects. Alternatively, you could build your own solution, or you could hire an integrator to build a solution from you. And in this case, you're normally combining custom engineering with what we call toolkit components, open source Asterisk, commercially licensed versions of open source, hardware platforms, third-party add-ons, to custom engineer a solution that is specifically targeted for the needs of your company. Now, you can think about those market needs versus OSS implementations a number of different ways. For example, you can think about market needs in relation to the technical competence of the end user. Those end users who have low technical skill maybe don't have the skill to take an open source project and engineer a solution from it, and they're more inclined to buy a prepackaged solution based on open source. Those with high technical competency might be inclined to want to engineer a custom solution because it provides a higher ROI or better productivity for their company, and therefore they are looking at custom engineered OSS solutions. You can think about it in terms of the size of those end users. Large enterprises most often have got high degree of technical skill. They often want to custom engineer their own solution. Small businesses, maybe they don't have the time or the skill, and so they look to buy a prepackaged solution. And medium-sized businesses maybe do a blend of both. You can think about it in terms of demand for products. Products for which there is a very high market demand, and IPPBX as an example, you would expect that there would be a number of turnkey products based off of open source that would fill the demand for those high-need mass market products. But out in the area where the demand is low for some customized solution for a particular business, there's not enough demand to yield a standard product. Therefore, custom-built open source applications fill that need. To try to help you understand how a company might position products in the market to have the market be able to take advantage of open source, let's just look at the way Digium's product is structured. Today, the currently shipping version of open source Asterisk is version 1.4. And Digium makes version 1.4 available for anyone in the world to download and use as they see fit. We also take version 1.4, send it through a series of test and qualification procedures, and produce a commercially licensed version. So for those end users who are looking for a company to stand behind it, or looking for intellectual property indemnification, or whatever the entitlements are that are important to that enterprise, they may prefer to build their application off of the commercially licensed version. And then to serve that segment of the market that has low technical competency, we also take that engine and build a standard IPPBX from it, which is our SwitchFox product. In fact, we're introducing a new version of SwitchFox here at the show, SwitchFox 4.0, that has greatly enhanced unified communications capability built in. And then, as the current beta version of open source Asterisk, version 1.6, is released, you might envision we would release a new version of the commercially licensed version, as well as a new version of SwitchFox, and then that just goes on with time. The real holy grail associated with open source applications for IP telephony is the ability to build a customized solution. That will allow end users to reduce their costs and improve productivity. Just a very, very simple example, Digium has a customer that is a doctor. The doctor is technically savvy, runs a small office. He was smart enough to write a script that would use the API into his patient management system and use the API into his SwitchFox phone system and have that script, in essence, replace an employee that was spending 4 hours a day calling patients, reminding them of their upcoming appointments, which was easily done with this customized solution. So that employee got to go spend those 4 hours a day doing something much more productive. Very simple example, and you can accelerate that all the way into the enterprise space where you build communication solutions that are tightly integrated with your existing business processes and ERP systems to reduce cost and improve productivity. This, of course, is not only enabled because the system's open source, it's enabled because it's a software-based architecture. It's just enhanced by the fact that it is an open source product. So in summary, economists are predicting that the next 12 to 24 months will be challenging. With that, companies are going to change the way their buying behavior is impacted. Their buying behavior is going to become much more conservative. They're going to be looking to save money and look for specific ROI in what they buy. VoIP is an investment that can pay a definable ROI today. Open source solutions are gaining momentum in the marketplace because they support offering a lower cost alternative. You also have the added benefit of no vendor lock-in, the fact that these products are easily customizable. And therefore, at this time, in this economy, open source software and voice over IP is the right product at the right place at the right time. So if you'd like to learn more about Asterisk, I would encourage you to come by Digium Asterisk World. If you are really interested in learning about Asterisk, there are still seats available in tomorrow's Asterisk introductory training class. And with that, I will either turn it back to Rich or open the floor for questions and comments.
We have time for